I get asked all the time, do you use cover crops? Should everyone use cover crops? When should you use cover crops? What should you use for cover crops? Are you sensing a theme to this video? Hey, I'm Brian at Next Level Gardening. If you're looking to join an online garden community that offers tips, tricks, and support to help you take your gardening to the next level, you're in the right place. Get started now by clicking subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss anything. Now let's get growing. So what are cover crops? Cover crops are non-harvestable plants that we use either between seasons when nothing else is growing in our beds, or during the season. You can even plant a cover crop in and amongst harvestable crops as a living mulch, but that's for a different video. Today we're going to talk about cover crops for winter soil building and protection. When your garden beds are unused, even for a season, the soil structure and soil life starts to break down and even erode. Soil erosion isn't just something that happens on a mountainside or riverbank or even a large farm. It happens in backyard gardens, raised beds, and even containers, of course, on a much smaller scale. The foliage of cover crops protects the soil surface from heavy rain, and the roots of the cover crop hold the soil together. Continuing to include cover crops in your garden will help soil structure by increasing organic matter, which improves the soil's ability to hold moisture and nutrients for the plants. The roots, as they decay, add organic matter into the soil, and the tiny little open paths they used to occupy is now a transit system for water, nutrients, microbes, worms. So no matter what season it is, it's best to always have either harvestable crops growing or cover crops growing. Cover crops are typically sown in spring or fall, and there are cool season and warm season plants to choose from. They grow through their life cycle until they flower, and then once they flower, they're cut down. The timing of this cutting down is important for two reasons. First, the plant, in terms of being beneficial to the soil, is at its zenith as soon as it starts to flower. There will never be a better time to cut it down and let its nutrients return to the soil, where your future crop will be able to absorb those nutrients. Second, you don't want your cover crops to set seed and drop seed. It's not only going to diminish the nutrients left for the soil, but the seeds will germinate and you will have the start of a difficult to control mess. My favorite cover crops are in the legume family and can absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere and transfer it through its roots directly into the soil it's growing in. That means if you grow a cover crop like peas or crimson clover, yep, they are a legume, it forms nodules in its root system that are full of nitrogen. This is called nitrogen fixation. When the plant is cut down in its prime, the plant leaves those stores for the next plants that will inhabit that area. After cover crops are cut down, the roots continue to be a home for mycorrhizal fungi and a food source for worms and other beneficial bacteria, insects, and things that inhabit the soil. As those root systems decay and are eaten, again, they provide more organic matter for the soil, improving its structure and composition. The vegetative growth above the soil surface that was cut down, also it's called residue, can be used in three different ways. Number one, if your cover crops are the only plants in that area, and if you are not following a no-till practice, you can till that residue right into the soil and let it decompose for 3 to 4 weeks before planting your next harvestable crops. Or you are following a no-till practice like I do, you can cut down the cover crops and leave the residue right on the surface of the ground to decompose. Number 3, if they were really bushy and there's more than the area can handle, they make great addition to the compost bin. Now, if the sight of this decomposing riffraff is unsightly to you, you can simply cover it up with a layer of mulch like straw or wood chips. The residue will break down underneath and add all those nutrients to the soil within 3 to 4 weeks. There are certain cover crops that are best left to larger farms, and some work well for the home gardener. If you have a small garden or raised beds, you won't want to plant perennial cover crops because they can become invasive and take over your beds. Some cover crops can be invasive if you don't till them under deep enough. Since I practice no-till or no-dig in my garden, those wouldn't work for me. And hopefully by this time you're seeing the advantages of no-dig and are on the same page as me. So I've put together a few of my favorite choices for us as home gardeners who are not going to be turning our soil over each season. So the first one is my absolute favorite, and that is crimson clover. It's a cool or warm season crop, both. It maintains a really nice shape and looks almost like an ornamental, especially as it starts to bloom. The blooms attract pollinators and other beneficial insects to your garden, and the plants themselves serve as a habitat for these insects. Because it's in the legume family, it will fix nitrogen for your next crop to enjoy. You can sow crimson clover in the fall, let it grow all winter, and cut it down in spring about a month before planting nitrogen lovers like squash, corn, leafy greens, and brassicas. It's cold hardy down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 18 Celsius. In northern gardens where it gets colder, let the cold kill it and leave it to decay on the ground during winter. Now, I know what you're thinking. I pull clover all the time out of my garden. Why would I want to plant a weed? Well, this is where the timing of the cutting down comes in. Don't let the beautiful crimson flowers seduce you into letting them go just a little bit longer. As soon as the flowers start to bloom, cut the entire plants down to the ground. The next one is winter rye. Winter rye is a cold-tolerant cover crop that can live through temperatures as low as minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 34 Celsius, I believe. You'll want to sow winter rye in the fall. It will slow down through the winter and it'll begin growing again in spring. As with crimson clover, it needs to be cut down as soon as it starts to flower to keep it from setting seed and giving your garden a permanent lawn. Winter rye, by the way, is also allelopathic, which means if you leave its residue to decompose on top of the soil, it will suppress seed germination of other plants. This is great for weed control, but not so great if you'll be sowing small vegetable seeds in that area within the next month. In that month, it should be completely brown, and at the end of that point, there's less of a chance of allelopathy to affect the seeds. Seedlings and transplants, however, won't be affected, even while the rye residue is still green. You want to sow cool season crops 15 to 45 days before your first frost. If you didn't get your cover crop sown in time this fall, you can still do it in the springtime with buckwheat. Buckwheat is a warm season cover crop that grows fast and is ready to be cut down and planted into within 40 days of sowing it. This means sowing it after danger of frost is past, you'll be ready to plant summer crops among the residue in just 5 or 6 weeks. The abundant flowers attract pollinators and beneficials like hoverflies, but do need to be cut down as soon as it's reached about 25% bloom, about a week into the flowering. At that point, it will not regrow from its roots, and it hasn't had time to fully develop its seeds. Some research uncovered that buckwheat could pull phosphorus up from deeper in the soil, and once it's cut down, return it to that top layer of soil where your next crops can access it. For cool season cover crops, the time to plant is in the fall, about 4 to 6 weeks before cold weather comes to kill them and stop their growth. Sow your chosen cover crop according to package directions. If you still have some crops producing, leave those and sow your cover crops around them. Some cover crops, like we mentioned, will die during the winter, and others will slow down and continue their growth in the spring when the weather warms up. If your crop is not killed by weather, you have to do it at the right time. The right time would be when the plant begins to flower. At that time, cut it or mow it down to soil level. If you mow it too early, it can try to regrow. If you wait too long, it will set seed and you've lost some of the valuable nutrients that would have been returned to the soil, and you may end up dealing with those seeds germinating all over and making a weedy mess. If you are tilling your garden, you can turn the plants under. One tip on when you cut back your plants, you can use a mower or a weed whacker. Make sure that those plants are kind of cut up and pulverized into smaller pieces. Use pruning shears or whatever you can to get them into the smallest pieces as possible. At the base of the plant, it'll break down faster is what I'm trying to say. After cutting the plants down, make sure you wait 3 to 4 weeks before planting in the area. This will allow time for the plant residue to be incorporated into the soil. And during that incorporation, new plants can have a difficult time getting established. So definitely don't skip the waiting period. Now, I will say that I don't use cover crops here because in my climate, I have harvestable crops growing year round. But there is a practice of leaving one area of the garden each year just for cover crops, just to let that area rest and build up its vigor. I may start to incorporate that, and if I do, I'll take you along with me. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, please give the video a thumbs up, consider sharing with a friend, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.